In a new federal lawsuit, State Attorney General Letitia James files a lawsuit and demands changes within the New York City Police Department. But some local leaders oppose federal oversight. CBS 2 political reporter Marcia Kramer has more.
New Yorkers have seen and been appalled by the videos. Bystanders sprayed with pepper spray, a squad car driving into a crowd of protesters, a woman pushed to the ground by police. Attorney General Letitia James says those and many more occurrences were civil rights violations. She filed suit in federal court to force the NYPD to change both its training and discipline. But she doesn't think that Mayor de Blasio or Police Commissioner Dermot Shea are the ones to enact change. She wants a judge to appoint an outside monitor.
The complaint outlines over and speaks to the fact that 30 incidents involve the use of pepper spray, 50 incidents in which officers used baton, 75 incidents in which protesters were punched or shoved.
The Attorney General charged that the police not only attacked protesters, but also went after legal observers and medics, including Rain Valentine, who was on his way home from a job at Kings County Hospital when he saw cops beating up a protester. When he tried to record it, the cops turned on him, beating him with batons.
I had to get 7 staples to close the gash in my head.
The Attorney General's lawsuit comes on the heels of a damaging report by the Department of Investigation, which found that the NYPD lacked a clearly defined strategy for responding to large-scale protests.
My office is seeking broad injunctive relief.
This isn't the first time a monitor has been ordered to oversee the NYPD. In 2013, a judge appointed a monitor after the agency's stop, question, and frisk policies were found to have violated the rights of minorities. Then mayoral candidate Bill de Blasio embraced the judge's findings and even used his son in a now legendary campaign commercial.
I want to tell you a little bit about Bill de Blasio.
Ironically, he's not in favor of a monitor this time. I couldn't agree more that there are pressing reforms that must and will be made this year, the mayor said in a statement. But he added, quote, "A court process and the added bureaucracy of a federal monitor will not speed up this work." The NYPD also went on record opposing the appointment of the monitor. The PVA pointed out that many cops were also injured during the protests. I'm Marcia Kramer, CBS 2 News.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. From its founding in 1845, the New York Police Department's actions and policies frequently took the form of targeting and victimizing low-income New Yorkers of color and other vulnerable minorities. From the New York Kidnapping Club, a precursor of the NYPD, who terrorized Black residents, to the 1863 Civil War draft riots, from its persecution of New York City's queer community since the 1910s to the present, from the Harlem riots of 1935 and 1943 to the Harlem and Bed-Stuy riots of 1964 and the Stonewall Uprising of 1969. The NYPD has faced extensive charges about its use of excessive and illegal violent force dating back to the first years of its founding. In more years, that's meant and included the City Hall police riot of the Dinkins era, the use of the discredited broken windows policing during the Giuliani administration, the equally discredited use of stop and frisk policies, and the anti-Arab demographic unit created during the Bloomberg years. That included the murder of Eric Garner in 2014, the overreaction to the George Floyd protests of 2020, the continuing racism and NYPD arrest practices during the de Blasio administration, and the revival of the plainclothes unit and increased aggressive practices under present Mayor Adams. This notorious and true historical narrative of harm, abuse, is rarely acknowledged. It needs to be told to change the narrative of policing and the extensive harm that the NYPD has inflicted on the city's people. We're welcome, and we're pleased to welcome two powerful young leaders of emerging movements attempting to change the failed, fear-based, racist, and punitive models so pervasive in our criminal justice system and policies toward the poor and the vulnerable. Benedicte Mbangala is an emerging abstract artist, a scholar activist, and a criminal lawyer born in Belgium, who also has deep roots in the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's dedicated her work and efforts to help dismantle and address state violence as seen through the lens of police brutality, the criminalization of communities of color, and the deprivation of resources necessary for human dignity. She's recently joined as an academic researcher the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College under the coordination of sociologist Alex Vitale. And she is part of the Police Reform Organizing Project founded by Bob Ganji. Kelly Young is a lawyer and activist with a wide and extensive community organizing background. She's the Civil Rights Campaign Coordinator of Vocal New York, a statewide grassroots membership organization that builds power among low-income people directly impacted by HIV/AIDS, the drug war, mass incarceration, and homelessness. Both Kelly and Ben see their efforts and movement organizing as global and connected struggles. So welcome both of you to the show. I've really been looking forward to having you both on and discuss what really began when we all attended, and you of course were on the panel, at the prop event, probably about a month or so ago, on policing and so on. So I'd like to start, if I may. Again, I'm just very grateful for you to be here, and you were so wonderful at that event. I just got blown away, and I want to continue our discussion. So let's begin by giving our audience a brief idea of what your organizations are involved in, what they're trying to do. Want to start, Kelly, or?
Sure, happy to, and super grateful to be here with you both. So as you mentioned, I am the Civil Rights Campaign Coordinator at Vocal New York, which is a grassroots member-based organization working to end mass incarceration, in the war on drugs, in homelessness, and in the HIV/AIDS epidemic. We believe that the people closest to the problem are the ones closest to the solutions. And so we are very intentional about taking our cues and our lead from people who have been impacted by these intersecting crises that we're hoping to address. We have chapters in New York City, Rochester, Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo, and Westchester. And we also have a services arm that works with people in the community who are current drug users, who have Hep C, and we do testing and treatment, and we do outreach as well. And at the crux of the organization, we are fighting for a New York that is grounded in the politics of love and compassion. And on the city level, that is a loud and robust call to remove resources from the NYPD and invest it into housing, healthcare, and other social life-saving services that people need to actually be safe.
Okay, we'll get into that more specifically, but it's been used, the term defund the police, right? And it's used in a variety of ways. So we'll get into that as well. Ben, how about yourself? Tell us about your activity.
Yeah, so what's interesting in my situation is that I don't live in the US. I'm not from the US, but I've been working with Alex Vitale, as you mentioned in the introduction, and I've also worked with Prop Police Organizing Reform Project in New York City. But beside that, I'm also involved with organizing effort in Belgium. So PROP, the main issue PROP tries to really fight for is really to, just as Kelly said, really fight to allow every New Yorkers to have a great life experience in New York City. So the organization is really aimed to really denounce harsh policing practices. And what they do most of the time, they sat in arraignment in New York City, and they are really documented the harsh policing responses towards community of color. They are showing the way broken windows offenses are targeting low income and racialized group in New York City. And they are really trying to work on dismantling this oppressive system policing is. So beside that, in Belgium, I'm also a lawyer, a criminal lawyer, and an activist, and with certain groups, I'm trying to work really on the same issues because, as we mentioned during the event in New York City, those issues are really interconnected struggle. It's not just an American issue. Policing is not just an American issue, but we also have those kind of issue in Belgium. So in that regard, I've been working with a few organizations as the Human Rights Leagues or certain community groups in Belgium, Black-led movements that are really working towards dismantling and really addressing the harm policing does, especially towards community of colors. Yeah.
Yes, and look, we can't. By my opening here, I mean this goes way back. This is not any particular administration. This is not any particular police officer. This is structural. Like the term you've used, Kelly. I mean, we're trying to transform the way in which we look at each other, and especially people who've been oppressed. And we need to do that with compassion and love. Cornel West, of course, talks about radical love, and justice is what love looks like in public, and so on. We'll get to that as well. So when we say it's structural, and let's put it this way too. You can't blame any one person. I don't think I don't think either one of you are saying that either. It's not about any particular political elite or economic elite, although they certainly have their disproportionate say in all of this. But also the community itself, perhaps most affected by what sociologists call structural violence. The poor and the working poor and so on themselves are fearful for their lives. And so they don't see the alternative. And so it's easy for them to then say, what are you doing? What are you doing taking the police? Or we need them. It keeps us, whatever safety we have is because of them. And they never get to see that alternative. So we're all up against you. As you know, I don't have to tell you, you're up against an enormous wall of resistance and mindset. And again, last point is to try to get the discussion in the realm of public safety and public health, rather than some sort of moralistic, these are the bad guys, this is, punishment, we need to be as brutal as possible so they can learn a lesson, and so on. Well, all right, I don't know if there was I'm sure there was a question or two involved in that, but let's start with, how do you react to the enormous need for this transformation and the resistance to it, even among some of the people you're trying to, advocate for, right? And take it, whoever wants to take that. Start off.
I can jump in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think. Well, I will say, because there are several different camps of resistance. I think there are people on the far right who are always going to be resistant to what we're trying to do, and you just got to leave them where they are, and recognize that what we're fighting for will benefit them as well, and that's fine.
Kelly, excuse me, sorry for interrupting. Could you just tell us why, in your understanding, why have they come to this hard line, punitive, fear-driven, racist perspective? Is there anything at all that can be done with at least some of them? Okay, sorry, I won't interrupt.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm sure there's something that can be done. I don't think that is the work of our movement.
Sort of the second coming of
I think
Messiah.
I mean, I think we live in a country and a world that is driven by white supremacy. And for a good amount of people, they benefit from that. And even the ones who benefit but can see the harm, it's scary and it's destabilizing, because what we are calling for is a completely different world order. And it is going to shake things up, and people will have to relinquish power that is ill-gotten. And no one really wants to do that because it's uncomfortable. And so there are folks who are just like resistance. And I think, you're a sociologist, I study psychology. I think there's a whole lot of like cognitive dissonance where, you have this thought about what is right and what is wrong in the world, and anything that challenges that is automatically rejected. And so I think there's a lot of things that play into that. But I think for the folks who are, representative of the communities that we at Vocal work most closely with, I think that is a part of organizing. I think that is a part of movement work, to actually meet people where they are, to hear about their concerns, and to have these conversations where it's like, yes, a lot of that needs to be validated. Like, people are saying, like, I am afraid because this harmful thing is happening in my community. And it can never be the space for us to say, no, that's wrong. We don't need police, kind of thing. I think you have to acknowledge that harm is happening in communities, and then go a step further to be like, okay, like, why is that harm happening? How do you want to address that harm? Do you actually want to live in a community where harm is met with more harm, where someone is traumatized, and in response to that, we traumatize the person who has caused harm? And I think your show is aptly named. I think what we really are missing is that radical imagination, because, and it's not the fault of people who are experiencing these intersecting crises. It's like, folks are trying to survive. The things that we are concerned about are material needs that we need to survive. And that does not allow for a lot of space to imagine what could be different, because it's like, I need to feed myself, I need to pay rent. And I think the work of Vocal is creating that space, bringing together folks who are impacted by these systems and these structures, and allowing space to think about what the world could look like, and then getting us from point A to point B, and saying, like, okay, this is the world we're trying to imagine. What are the policies that need to change? What are the practices that need to change? How do we need to really just like reorient government in a different way that actually addresses root causes? Because our government is very ineffective for addressing root causes, and we've seen that time and again. And I think, as I don't know.
No, well put.
As all of these crises compound on each other, and with COVID and with climate change, like, there are so many ways in which you can really just see how our government is resistant to dealing with root causes. And that's just going to cause more harm in communities that are already vulnerable, already marginalized, already fighting to survive.
Yeah. Not only resistant, but very capable and willing to distort the narrative and blame the victims here and so on. Ben, do you want to, fascinated with what you're working on in Belgium there, and the comparisons you want to draw. I know you come back and forth, right, to New York City and then to Belgium. And so you see parallels, right?
Yes, of course. And I really loved what Kelly said, that she raised up the fact that the name of the podcast was beautifully chosen, Radical Imagination, because when I was working in New York City and when I was organizing with Alex or with Robert Ganji and other folks that are working towards police abolition, it's really, really amazing because they were really pushing for us to really imagine more. And I kept saying that, yes, it's really not that radical because in Belgium, actually in Europe, in most of the country where I lived for all of my life, we don't have police in schools. We don't have that amount of police officer in every corner of every street. We have, that radical imagination, that dreaming before thinking activists are seeking in the US. I was saying to them that it's not that radical because it already exists. We can do that. America can do that also. It can work towards and achieve those kind of policing models. We don't have in America to deal with social ills by using policing. And James, you asked me if I saw differences. Of course, one of the first differences I see when I was in New York, although it was not my first time in New York City, it was the amount of police officer in every corner of every street. I was really, really shocked by it. And I remember being with my mom, who was really uncomfortable about it because there were policing officers in the grocery stores, in the street, in front of the theaters, everywhere. And I think that what I also noticed as a big difference is that in New York, if I may just talk about New York because that's where I really spend a lot of time, is that police officers have militarized equipment, which is really not the case in most of European countries. A lot of police officers don't have guns when they're patrolling the street. And I also see that in Europe, one of the big difference I notice is that police officer only can resort to deadly force in case of absolute necessity, as we say in the Convention of the European Convention on Human Rights, where in America I could see that resorting to violence was really a direct response, if I may say. So, yeah, there were a lot of difference, but I think for me the main difference was really the fact that in Europe a lot of social problems are being dealt with by social groups, where I could see that it was really not the case when I was in New York City. People were having mental health breakdown, and police officer would would deal with it. And I remember being shocked sometimes. I was like, oh, that's really crazy that it takes a police officer to really deal with someone who's clearly having a mental health crisis. But what's really interesting for me is that even there is difference in those systems, it doesn't mean that in Europe we don't have any problems. We don't have any problems with policing. It doesn't mean that policing in Europe is amazing and that people of color are not suffering from policing practices. So with the organization I've been involved with before starting the bar, the idea, as Kelly said, was really, really to basically allow people from minority background and from impoverished neighborhood who are heavily policed to really live in dignity. Yeah. So there is this organization who's called l'Observatoire des Polices, Observatory of Police, who really work on showing the data of policing violence and policing killings in Europe and in Belgium, especially for people to really understand what is happening. So that's an organization I've been involved with. And the work was really to just allow people to have the information about what's really happening. Because if people don't have the information, they won't be able to stand up and fight against those systems, those oppressive systems.
Yeah, no, this is not rocket science. We know what can reduce these rates of violence and crime. We know that. We work extensively with psychiatrist James Gilligan, who's documented, who has the data over 125 years showing that when a Democratic administration is in, relatively speaking, versus a Republican, they tend to orientate themselves toward advocating for programs that make life somewhat, notice how I'm qualifying all of this, somewhat better, more gentler, and so on. And it takes the form of reduction of rates of violence. I mean, it's again not rocket science. Think of if everybody could think of their own lives and what has really made a difference and how they've been able to move forward. It is about love and nurturing and getting a decent education, having a decent housing, and so on and so on. So we know that, I've got Alex's book here, The End of Policing, and on the front page is very, I think, relevant to what you've both been talking about here. The problem is not police training, police diversity, or police methods. The problem is the dramatic and unprecedented expansion and intensity of policing in the last 40 years. A fundamental shift in the role of police in society. The problem is policing itself. So we want to use that radical measures, and bring about the concrete reality of that sort of love and harmony and meeting people's basic needs as rapidly as possible. So again, it involves, as you were saying, both of you were saying, the organizing, the raising of consciousness, getting us to think of this as possible. And again, maybe we all should have vouchers and we make a trip to Belgium there, all adult Americans and, of a certain age. And I mean, I would overrun the country. We should spend a week or two. We'll spread it around the Nordic countries and so on and learn. I've been there too. And we need to see those alternatives. And I'm so grateful and respect you so much, both of you, for trying to make this happen, and not just in the distant future, but as concretely as possible as now. But let me ask a concrete question. What does the left have a problem, progressives, if you will, with its branding of all of this? When you talk to people about abolishing the police, even the term defunding, what do you think that strikes in people's minds, or it can be easily used as they want? You know what I'm trying to say here? I'm sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit, but what do you say to people when you start talking like that to them? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. We want to be able to police ourselves, and we can do that. We can do that. There are places in the world where that can happen, and so on. Or much more so than of course we have here. So is there a way of messaging this? I hate to use that term, but better among people like us, let's say, who want to reach as many people as possible, not lose them in this debate. Kelly, you want to?
Yeah, I think, I can't remember who said this, but one of the responses around pushback around the term defund or the term abolition was I can imagine during slavery that, the call for abolition was met with, oh my gosh, maybe not abolition. Maybe we need to reform slavery. Maybe we need to make it more humane. And I think that has been a really compelling line of argument for me, because I don't want to be on the side of history that is I was afraid to say abolish policing or abolish the carceral state, and we should just try to find a nice, gentler way to reform it. I think if we're going to be honest about the history and harm of policing, then we you can't waver on the solution. Like, you have to get rid of it. And I think the call to defund the police sparked one of the largest civil rights uprising in world history. And I don't think that has been stated enough and is stated as loudly. Like, there is power in the call to defund. I think there was probably an equally powerful backlash, but I don't think that means that we cede ground or we cede language. Like, the call to defund is exactly what it is. We want to take money away from the police, and we want to invest it into communities and into things that will actually keep us safe.
Yes. That's the key.
I think the thing is being unequivocal about that. I think on the left, there's a lot of fear and like nervousness in what we're saying and wanting to be palatable to everyone. And I think we have to get out of that habit. Like, there are going to be people who disagree with us. There are going to be people who don't like the term defund or who don't agree with abolition. But our job is to make them, like, is not to say, okay, what nicer word can we say? Is to be clear about what our demands are and why those are our demands. And I mean, it takes work and it takes conversation. I don't think we can like beat people over the head with the call to defund. But if there are people who are interested in like being in community and being in conversation and being in movement spaces with us, then we have to hold fast to what we're calling for, because we can't give it up. Like, what we're calling for.
It's a terrific answer. I mean, really well put. Could agree with you more. And I think it is about, as Reverend Barber says, stand in the breach and get some backbone and integrity and speak your mind. And you'd be surprised. A lot of people will resonate to that, and so on. So let's talk about the homeless and homelessness for a while. What is Vocal's approach? What are you trying to do there on that particular issue, and how it's related to the attitudes that we all have, that many of us have still in this country about the poor and so on? How are you getting from A to B here and showing people there's a better way? What are you advocating?
Yeah, I think one, at the base level, is our orientation towards people experiencing homelessness. Because in a lot of like housing advocacy spaces, I think in movement work in general, I think we often do this thing where we create like a hierarchy of who deserves what. And in a lot of housing justice circles is focused on people who are in housing, and we don't want them to lose their housing, which is noble and absolutely. But then a lot of the times people who are already on the street are ignored. And I think a lot of the work of Vocal is like making it so that our homeless neighbors cannot be ignored, which is huge. And the call to end homelessness, like, we want a housing guarantee. We recognize that instability is one of the main drivers of behavior that is criminalized. And instead of saying, we have the resources to house every single New Yorker here who needs it, we have a government that unleashes police officers on them.
Right.
We have encampment sweeps. We have homeless people literally being murdered on the street for being homeless. And a mayor who just vetoed a package of bills that would make it so that everyone, like people who are in shelters, have access to vouchers to get housing. And
you're saying Adams just vetoed that bill?
Yes. The bill is currently vetoed, but we do have a veto-proof supermajority. I think that's the right term for that. And so we have a lot of champions in City Council who are fighting and holding the line on those packages of bills because of how important and how necessary it is to make sure that folks experiencing homelessness are placed into secure housing immediately, and that housing is permanent and it is affordable. And instead, we're hearing one, there's a whole lot of like the not in my backyard people, the NIMBY folks who are like, I don't want homeless New Yorkers in my backyard. And it's like, well, if they were housed, they wouldn't be homeless. And so that issue would be solved. Or you have one of our bills that we're fighting for is, can't think of the name of it, but it removes the ability for landlords to discriminate against people based off of their criminal history when they're looking for housing. And so one of the ways that like crises are intersecting, because you have folks who are criminalized for being poor and then are homeless and then are discriminated against when they're trying to get housing. And it just like creates a cycle of crisis that we're not able to get out of. And that bill has faced a ton of backlash because people are like, we want to be able to discriminate against people. And particularly Black, brown, and poor people, because those are the folks who are over policed, who are disproportionately filling up our jails and prisons. And so the work of our, what's called our homelessness union, one is to materially change the conditions for people experiencing homeless. So that's like folks who are living on the street, which is why we're calling for cops to be removed out of homeless outreach, because what they do is just further destabilize people. We're calling for better conditions inside of shelters, because we know that congregate shelters are deeply, deeply dangerous and unsafe. And there's a lot of folks who are like, I would rather spend the night on Rikers than in a congregate shelter. And then we're trying to make it so that people who are in shelters and who are on streets are better like able to access housing, permanent housing and affordable housing. And so there's a lot of different entry points that are necessary to undo this crisis and address the crisis. And it does feel like an uphill battle a lot of the time, because we are meeting a lot of resistance. And then we have a mayor who's like, we need to build more housing when we have 80,000 empty units in the city because people can't afford to live in them. And so it's not a housing crisis, it's an affordability crisis. We have housing here. No one can afford it though.
And also sort of have various other services made available too, whether it's education, mental health, nutrition, and so on. Exactly.
Yeah, so, and there's so many different intersections, because I don't know the exact number, but there are tens of thousands of children who are homeless. And so there's the intersection of like housing and education and just like a guaranteed income. Like people need money to survive. Like we need access to resources, and there are things that we could do to solve these problems. But we don't have a government that has designed itself and focused itself on actually solving problems.
Yeah. And Ben, again, the European experience, we hear, would you say it's as intense or less intense, but still there, the crises that we've just talked about? We hear a lot about also the resistance to various immigrant groups coming and the use of police force and so on in that way. Is that the way it's manifesting itself more in Europe and Belgium and other European countries?
Yes, that's a great question. I really don't want to say that it is not as intense as what you guys are experiencing in the United States, because I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it's not a problem as important as it is in the US. Of course, we don't have in Europe, in Belgium, we don't have the same numbers of killings of Black and brown at the end of the police, but we sure have a problem with policing, because policing is an institution that is colonially constructed. And in order for that institution to really reproduce its power, it really still today target certain groups of people. So what you see, you talk about the targeting of immigrants, it really happens a lot, especially in France. I don't know if you guys heard the news, but let alone yesterday, a young Black man died at the end of the police in a traffic stop. But we have in Belgium, in Europe, a lot of immigrant groups and documented folks, we are more likely to be people from racialized neighborhoods that are being targeted, heavily targeted by police. So, of course, in Europe, we have this idea of Europe exceptionalism, which, yeah, a lot of academics, a lot of people still think today that racism doesn't exist in Europe, that racism is only in America. And we really constructed a narrative of there is really a silence around race. That's right, a lot of problems around race or policing are not really being tackled and discussed, but it doesn't mean that we don't have those issues. So I would say that the problem is really intense, but it's intense in a way which is, in coherence with what's happening in Belgium, what Belgium history of policing look like. So we don't have that much of killings, but we still have people that are being disproportionately criminalized, and there is really a presumption of dangerousness towards immigrant communities of color. In Brussels, for example, a lot of people which are being arrested and policed are really people from Arabic background, are people that are immigrants, are Black and brown people. So yeah, the institution still operates the way, for me, the way it was really designed to operate, to uphold social power. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I wonder if you care to be, a little personal, perhaps. I know in your bio you were born in Belgium, but have deep roots in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah.
You want to go into your own family experience, perhaps?
Yes, of
How you
course. So,
that or so on.
sorry, what did you say, James?
Well, I just wondered if you'd like to really personalize it in a sense, your own family's experience. You were born in Belgium, you have deep roots in the Democratic Republic of Congo. How is that? What's been some of the struggles, perhaps, that you and your family have gone through?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that question. So yeah, so I'm Congolese, but I was born and raised in Belgium. My parents came in the early 80s, and in the early 80s, as my father liked to explain, he always said that it was really harsh for Black youth because of this same idea, this same presumption of dangerousness around the Black body. And what my dad said when he tell us about his history when he first came in Belgium is really that the best way for him to be, to live freely in this wide Belgium space was really, really, really to have an education. Because back then, and it's still the case today, the people of color who are being educated, who have the chance to have an academic education, are not being easily policed, are as the thug youth that are just walking in the streets. So back then, my dad and my mom really came here. They started to study, but even after gaining that education, they were not distant from the struggle, because what they really experience is that as people who came from Africa, Congo, during early 80s, they were still seen as foreigners. They were still seen as just Africans. They were just still seen as just Black people that are not really civilized enough. So my parents had those kind of struggle. As to me, And to my brothers and sisters who grew up here and who were born here, our struggle is different towards policing, but it's still there, especially for my brothers. My brothers, for example, I started to work on this topic. I started to being involved to policing and social justice because a few years ago, my little brothers was searched, was stop and search. So I started to really dive deep in those issues because of the personal, because of these personal stories that happened in my own family. So yeah, I really think that in a personal way, I cannot distance myself from the struggle, even if I was born in Belgium, even if I was raised in Belgium. I still feel and I still experience this harsh relationship with policing, and my brother, especially as Black men.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Kelly, I'm sure your background also, if you'd like to get into that a little bit, that resonates probably with your experience, correct? Or in some ways?
Yeah. So I am from Brownsville, Brooklyn, born and raised. And I think very similarly, like just seeing every man in my family be stopped by police is something that like instilled a sense of like, oh, this world is wrong. And something needs to be done about it. And there was like a statistic that came out like in the height of stop and frisk, there were more stops in Brownsville than there were people. And so there's just like this heavy, heavy police presence. And I don't know, I think studying psychology, studying sociology just like helped me to realize like what it does to like a culture as a group and what it does to like individuals, like psychology and psyches to like be policed like from birth. Like just it is disruptive, it is traumatizing. It has poor health outcomes, it has poor economic outcomes, it has poor like justice involved outcomes. And it's like this system of policing that has been set up is doing exactly what it is designed to do, which is like to control Black communities, Black bodies, Black wealth, Black acceleration. And it is doing it so well. And it is terrifying. And I think like growing up in that and seeing it firsthand and then being able to like study it from a bird's eye view really drives a lot of why I'm committed to this work, because it is something that it is a collective struggle and it requires a collective like solution. Like the fact that, you know, I was able to go to college and go to law school does not mean that I am somehow like on the outside of how white supremacy functions in the city, in the state, in this country, in this world. And so I think a big part of the work is like recognizing that all of our liberation and safety is tied to each other, and this system of policing is not about safety, it's about control, and control of like poor Black people for the benefit of wealthy white landowners. And I think just like, which is why I think Prop's report is so important, because that analysis and that like historical storytelling really helps paint the picture of why reforms will never be enough. You know, why we have to stand very firm in this defund space, because it's not just about like balancing the budget. It's not just like, okay, where can we take money from? It's also just recognizing how police have been deployed to address social issues that they have no business being in, and have made it worse. And so, yes, they have way too much money. And in New York City, they're planning to get $2 billion more. And so it's just like a very, very outsized budget. And the harm that is being done is equally outsized. And then the agencies that are actually equipped to solve the problems are the ones that are being defunded. And so it's really like a twilight zone. And so we can't cede any ground in this fight, because we won't survive.
Yeah, no, it's again very well put. And let's give a moment of praise to PROP too, their court monitoring system, which again has identified the huge disproportionate arrests, the arraignments, and so on, incarcerations. No, that's the story that we need to put forward. You know, this is such a complex issue and so on in some ways, and also somewhat very simple. You know, in reading the PROP book, The Notorious and True History of the Finest, they get into some of the early discrimination and brutality directed against Irish Americans. And yet, many also joined the police force and turned into bullying, you know, blacks and other disenfranchised minorities and so on. And one would think that, gosh, you've been through this, you know what this is about. And why would you go ahead and then continue that bullying when you yourself know how damaging and how toxic it was? I mean, so this goes, we are so, we've got so many toxic elements to this that affects all of us. I've taken to in my classes now to go around and each and every person gives me their narrative about what has happened to them, their people, how they came here. And again, from very diverse groups, there's a similarity, there's a commonality of being bullied, at least at that level. You know what I'm saying here. So I noticed this is going much too fast. We only have a minute or two left. So how do we reach you? How do we get involved with Alex here? How do we get involved with Vocal? Please tell us. I know our audience is really interested in this.
Yeah, so for Vocal, this is where I should know our like social media handles and stuff. But we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram. I believe it's like at Vocal New York, all spelled out.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, you can get involved in any of our unions. So we have our Civil Rights Union, which focuses on folks impacted by mass incarceration, our Users Union, which are for former and current drug users, Homelessness Union for folks who have or are experiencing homelessness, and then our Positive Leaders Union, which are folks who are living with AIDS and HIV. And right now we are in the midst of a budget fight on the city level. Our budget is due July 1st, which is this Saturday. Wow. And things are very much up in the air. But if you know, Mayor Adams gets his way, we are going to have a budget that continues to put the most marginalized and vulnerable New Yorkers in even more danger. They won't have access to resources or the services that they need in order to thrive. And the NYPD is slated to get $2 billion more dollars. And so we're having an Action Friday at City Hall Park at noon around the city's budget. And so if you are interested and available, I will be there and we can connect then.
Terrific. That's what I'm glad you got that out to our audience. And Ben, and just sorry, 20 seconds.
Yeah,
I'm ready. Tell us.
I will just speak about PROP as you were talking about it. So to be involved with PROP or to reach them, please go to Instagram. You will see PROP page. In Twitter, you will see PROP page, and you can also follow Genji from PROP. He's really active on Twitter, and he's really, really fast to respond to any of your emails.
And not only that, the Radical Imagination will have in person, live, Bob Ganji. He's going to be on the show. I think it's July 12th or second week. So there we go. We're going to the source here. So, all right. Listen, I've just been really thrilled. Your discussion here has been so helpful and wise, and just continue that radical imagination. Let's all bring it about as soon as we can. Thank you again so very, very, very much for being on the Radical Imagination. And again, this is Jim Vredos. We'll see you next week on the Radical Imagination. Thanks for watching.